something that really jumped out to me is that the COVID pandemic was a tremendous missed opportunity for reinstilling a healthy living again, right? So when you look at most demographics, not all, but most demographics, if most demographics had lost, 10 to 20 pounds and had stopped smoking and had stopped drinking and had started being outside more, right, and exercising, your risk factor for the types of damage you would experience if you if you contracted COVID would actually fall by a greater amount than simply getting the vaccine. And so why as a society didn't we say, hey, everyone, this is your time. If you're concerned about this virus, as you should be, go out and exercise more, right? Instead, they shut down the gyms. It's like, well, no, everyone should be in the gym right now. Everyone should be in the gym right now exercising.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to ALLSMITH, where we dive into mindset, leadership, and people shaping their communities and beyond. Today, we're bringing back a special someone who truly embodies leadership with purpose and an incredible mindset that has positively impacted the Coronado community, Mr. Richard Bailey. Welcome to the show, man.
Good to see you, Bryce.
It's awesome to be back. And as we mentioned briefly offline, what about 6 hours left as the mayor of Coronado?
That's right. 6 hours and counting.
That's a big thing to say out loud. That's a big feeling. There's a lot of memories, and there's a lot of emotion, and there's a lot of sacrifice that has gone into that. As you kind of put the stamp in the conclusion to that chapter, what emotions are coming up for you?
Man, that's a heavy question, actually. It hasn't felt, being that I've been the mayor for the last 8 years, and prior to that, I was on the city council for 4 years. So having been a part of the Coronado community in that role for now 12 years, and it hasn't felt real that it's actually coming to an end. And it finally started hitting me yesterday when I was going through City Hall and, starting to turn over the office, make way for the new guy. And I teared up a little bit thinking that, this is the ending of a chapter. But I'm extremely proud of how the city's performed over the last 8 years, especially in the face of, we had COVID, we had the BLM riots, we had the largest environmental disaster in San Diego County history with the Tijuana sewage issue. And so looking back on that time, just with a lot of pride in how we as a city handled those issues and navigated that, and also just a lot of gratitude for the relationships I made along the way. And it was just such an honor to represent Coronado, because everyone has a story about Coronado, right? You were either stationed there, or you traveled there, or you lived there, or whatnot, or you visited for the 4th of July parade. So everyone has a story about Coronado, and to be a small part of Coronado's story has been a real honor.
Totally. One of my favorite quotes is people will forget what you said. They'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel. And personally, and I'll also diffuse this into friends and family that have come down to visit me, there's something unique when you cross that Coronado Bridge. It almost feels like a vacation. It almost feels like a dropping of the shoulders. You observe both the left and right as you're crossing that bridge, and just the beauty. But there's also a safety. You're approaching a space where there's NSW, Navy Special Warfare.
Right.
There's a lot of high-performing individuals. Everybody says hello to each other.
Yeah.
There's a very outdoorsy, almost like a Malibu type vibe, a little bit, where people are very good looking. They take care of themselves. They eat appropriately. And there's just an outdoor nature and feeling that it's different, man. It's an internal just joy and love. And a lot of my friends, I was just with a couple friends this weekend, and their first line is, "Oh, I love Coronado. This is the first place I love to visit when I come to San Diego." When I share some of those compliments, they're not just from me trying to build you up. They're sure. Honest reflection. How does that make you feel, knowing that you've been a part of that for what you said, over a decade?
Yeah, there's a lot of pride in that, right? Coronado is an aspirational city. Many people want to live there, and they want to live there because not just because of the great weather and the proximity to the beach and all that. Like that's all well and good, but it's that sense of community. There's a tremendous amount of patriotism within our town. People look out for one another, and so it is a throwback community in the sense of that we really love living where we are. We love our neighbors. Even if we disagree with them, we're going to look out for them. So you have that kind of throwback mindset with all the big city amenities across the bridge. But Coronado is what every city in America should be. There's no question about that.
I love the way you said that. Something that's a little controversial, but it's subtly confusing to me. As you mentioned the word patriotism. And I feel like sometime within the last 3 or 4 years in this election challenges and the left versus the right and the tremendous controversy there that arose tremendously through COVID and through other things. But all of a sudden, it's like if you have American flag, it's all of a sudden viewed as like conservative.
Right.
And it's like, hold on a second. I thought we're all American here. And that's something that kind of piques my eyebrows where it's like, hey, I don't know if that should really be the case. How have you managed that a little bit as far as just like this ideation and then the infiltration of social media that obviously carries its own biases?
Yeah, so a few things come to mind. I love our country. I think America is the greatest country that has ever existed. And I say I love my country because the idea of our country is perfect. What our country stands for is perfect. Now, has the execution always been perfect? Of course not, because our country is ran by a government, and that government is made up of men and women who are imperfect individuals. And so they haven't always gotten it right. And there's plenty of examples throughout our nation's history where they haven't gotten it right to maximize our nation's ideals. But the promise of our nation is perfect. And that's what the flag means to me, right? So I absolutely love our nation. And I think if people viewed our nation through that lens of, well, what is the promise of our nation? That's something we can all get behind. And then in terms of kind of the right and left aspect of things these days, it's unfortunate that people have become polarized and forgotten that, when you think about conservatism and liberalism, they're really the opposite sides of the same coin. Conservatives want to limit the scope of government to maximize liberty. Liberals want to maximize liberty, but in order to do that, you need to minimize the scope of government. And so it's really just, it should be in the classical sense, the similar, same desire for outcomes. But it hasn't turned out that way. It's no longer, classical liberalism versus traditional conservatism. It's left versus right. And if you're on a different team, then you're my enemy, which couldn't be further from the truth.
So far from the truth. And also, I think we talked about it briefly on our previous podcast. One of the beauties of our country, which Elon has done an amazing job with X, freedom of speech. And I think that lands on both sides of that coin. And I think what's beautiful about that is you and I can disagree, but we can have respect in the messy middle.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the difficulty of like, oh, you don't believe what I believe? You're a fool. I'm pushing you away. Now it's like, that's one of hundreds of ideologies or policies, and you're only married to that one. It's okay for us to disagree on that thing. What are your thoughts on that as to how to create healthy dialogue, healthy conversation where people are truly listening? Because I have ideologies based on my upbringing, based on my life experience, based on, I call it nutrition, which isn't just food, but it's like what I watch, what I see, who I spend time with. And everybody has their own form of that as to how they're manipulated or malleably changed, similar to like a piece of Play-Doh as a child.
Right.
I'm curious, like how do you dance with that dance? Because it's a tough conversation to have.
So when I'm engaging in conversation with folks, one of the kind of taglines that emerged over the past 4 to 10 years has been my truth. And there's no such thing as my truth or your truth. There is my perspective and your perspective, and there is the truth. And I think when we approach conversations, we need to approach it with a good faith effort that we as individuals are going to bring our perspectives to the table in pursuit of the truth. I'm not trying to convince you my perspective is right and the end all be all, and you're not going to try to convince me that your perspective is right and the end all be all, and that one of us has to be right, one of us has to be wrong. It's here's the information I'm aware of, and here's what my experience tells me. What is your information? How does that inform your opinion or your perspective of the broader picture? And let's both try to approach this as our mutually shared objective here is to arrive at the truth, or a greater picture of what the truth is than both of us sitting down here individually have. And I think when you frame it, conversations like that, where you start off with, hey, here's the clear objective of what we're trying to answer, And here's what I know. What do you know? Oh, great. Now, based on what we both know now, what are our opinions on the subject? Instead of trying to make it a right versus wrong type thing, that is the only path forward to actually benefit both parties involved in that dialogue.
I love the way you said that. I also can't help but reference Ted Lasso here, which is be more curious than judgmental.
Oh, I love that. Yeah,
right? And it's one of those things, it's like there are two various perspectives. There are perspective of the truth, opinion of the truth.
Right.
But I really dislike the, oh, you believe that, so now we can't be friends anymore.
Right.
It's like, I don't necessarily believe that. I just contextually like some of these other things a little bit better, and I think they're better policies. And here's why.
Right.
And I think also tone matters, because you're communicating in a sense that's like maybe there's a slight uptone at the end of your communication strategy, which allows you to share with the receiver of that communication that like, hey, I'm malleable. If you make a really good point that maybe I was unaware of or I didn't see, now I might move a little bit closer, but also I'm not really trying to convince you. And so there's another game that you play there, and Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot, like the social hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't know that there needs to be a political hierarchy. I think it just needs to be observation and open-mindedness.
Right. Passionate positions loosely held. I'm very passionate about the positions I hold, but if you introduce new perspective or new information or new experience, I'm willing to let go of this and move on to a different position. And I will hold that equally as passionately as I did before. Because you should be passionate about the positions you hold, but you should also be open to changing them if new information presents itself.
For sure. What comes to mind there is the metaphor of holding on to sand with such tight grip.
Right.
You can't really hold that much sand. But when you loosely open your fingers a little bit, now you can hold a larger volume of sand,
Right.
which allows for more information, more connectivity. I mean, at the end of the day, we are tribal creatures. And we think about like primal nature and the beauty of what some of the just loose topics that are now being introduced by RFK Jr.
Sure.
What I really love and appreciate is just the concept of like, okay, I don't claim to be a health expert. I claim to be somebody that navigates the health space and gathers information and listens to a lot of the so-called experts. I love the Peter Attias of the world. I love the various scientists and the Hubermans, and I love listening to all their different perspectives. I don't agree with all of them, but I think the information brings variables that are very important to consider. My challenge with COVID is that it immediately leaned towards reactive medicine as opposed to preventative medicine, which is, hey, let's get optimal sleep first. Let's try to get natural sunlight. Let's integrate hydration, vitamin D, magnesium, things that most people are deficient in. Let's also integrate quality food. Let's stay away from processed sugars. I mean, I look at right now, we're in the midst of the holiday season. It's like, what do most people do during the holidays? They drink more alcohol, they consume more sugar.
And they move less.
And they move way less. And so is it really flu season, or is it I make bad choices and I'm going to blame it on the flu season?
Right.
I don't know, but I think it's a fair question.
Sure.
And so when I look at
It's certainly a contributing factor.
100%.
Right.
And what I look at now is like, okay, I'm not claiming to be right or wrong. I'm not standing on my high standing mountain or whatever. But I am saying, why are those things not talked about more?
Right.
Why are they not part of the conversation? And when I zoom out and I put a smell test to that, I'm like, something stinks. Something seems a little bit off that we're not talking about lifestyle factors. And I'll conclude my rant with this. We're majoring in the minors. Taking a vaccine, but not pursuing the lifestyle factors, I don't think they synergize well together. I think if somebody chooses to take the vaccine, totally fine, but also integrate that. Or if somebody chooses not to get the vaccine, totally fine, but also integrate the lifestyle factors.
So I'll piggyback off your rant. When you think about something that really jumped out to me is that the COVID pandemic was a tremendous missed opportunity for reinstilling a healthy living again, right? So when you look at most demographics, not all, but most demographics, if most demographics had lost, 10 to 20 pounds and had stopped smoking and had stopped drinking and had started being outside more, right, and exercising, your risk factor for the types of damage you would experience if you if you contracted COVID would actually fall by a greater amount than simply getting the vaccine. And so why as a society didn't we say, hey, everyone, this is your time. If you're concerned about this virus, as you should be, go out and exercise more, right? Instead, they shut down the gyms. It's like, well, no, everyone should be in the gym right now. Everyone should be in the gym right now exercising. They left open pot shops and liquor stores, but we're closing other small businesses. And it's like, nope, actually, you guys should really be moderating, if not eliminating your alcohol consumption. You should definitely not be smoking because this affects your lungs. And like just re-engaging in a healthy lifestyle would have been more productive, especially in the long run, but still in the short run too. And we as a society would have been better off today if we had taken that approach, more so than just saying, everyone hole up inside. We're not going to recommend changing your diet. We're not going to recommend more exercise. We're going to say, hey, just stay inside and then get this vaccine. Well, that might have helped on the short run for some demographics, but certainly not all. That would have all benefited from a change in lifestyle.
Totally. And at the very least, just presenting that side of the argument for someone that's a little bit stubborn and pessimistic like myself, that would have created a little bit more buy-in where I'm like, oh, okay, at least you're referencing that a wellness and an optimal lifestyle does contribute to an enhanced quality of life.
Exactly.
But for that to be not mentioned at all, piqued my eyebrows and I was like, whoa, this feels a little bit off. I'm not saying right or wrong. I am saying I'm going to press pause though, and I'm going to wait and I'm going to observe. And as I observed, all these things that were considered pseudo-conspiracies all of a sudden started to float to the surface.
Right.
So what are your thoughts around now seeing this information about the Wuhan lab leak and everything that's now come forward with Dr. Fauci?
The most unfortunate part about COVID is that, look, we have a lot of institutions in our nation. And institutions are important. They do have a vital role to play in a functioning society. But in order for them to continue playing this vital role, they have to have credibility. They have to have the trust of the people that they affect. Unfortunately, throughout COVID, when you had agencies that come to find out got it not just a little wrong, got it completely wrong, and they were unwilling to entertain any other sets of information to make their decisions, well, that undermines, rightfully so, their credibility going forward. And so now we live in a society where it's really hard to trust many of these institutions that should otherwise be playing a very vital role in our nation. And so that to me is the biggest travesty of the entire COVID pandemic, is that these institutions lost a lot of credibility and it was on them.
And the other thing is let's just say they're going to die on that high horse. At some point, when you come forthcoming and you're seeing more data, more research, more things that are exposing the truth, apologize. Take ownership.
Have some humility.
Totally. And it's like, we're all human beings. We struggle, sometimes based on information and fear, uncertainty, and doubt impacts all of us. There was lots of deaths during that time. There was various perspectives based on our hospital workers and our emergency medicine doctors and the people that were seeing the worst of the worst at that time. And then there's other people on the other side like myself that are like trying to push for exercise, trying to do different things, and then receiving cease and desists for doing things in the gym or doing things on the street where you're still 6 feet apart, but you're trying to do good. And then all of a sudden, you're given some sort of citation when down the street people are engaging at a local liquor store less than 6 feet apart, and that's technically allowed. It just didn't make sense.
It makes sense.
And I think noting that is just an important thing moving forward, where it's like, take everything with a grain of salt, observe, ask questions. And like you and I've discussed before, our governments and our policies just need to be better.
Right.
What are your thoughts kind of moving forward around Fauci? I mean, he seems to be a controversial figure right now. Was it purposeful? Was it not? Was it a money move? When you look at the stock market and you see the uptick in like Pfizer and some of these other pharmaceutical companies like crushing it with regards to monetization, what are your thoughts on that? And then now seeing everything kind of tank, you're seeing crypto start to come back into the conversation. At the end of the day, I'm no expert, but I do think if you follow the money, you can typically expose some of the truth.
One of was a former governor of Arkansas. He was asked the question, how do we get money out of politics? And his response was, if you want money out of politics, you need to get politics out of money. And what he meant by that was when you have a government that has their hands in every industry and can make or break industries and put up artificial barriers to entry in that industry, well, then naturally you're going to have these corporations trying to benefit their own self-interest, benefit their shareholders that are going to be putting money into politics to influence the politicians and to set up these regulations that benefit them. And that's where you need politicians that are willing to say, no, we're not going to be subject to whoever our largest donors are. We are moving forward with this vision for America where you have greater access to information. You're going to have more choice as a consumer to make decisions that you believe are in the best interest for yourself. And we're going to let the chips fall where they may. Instead of trying to engage and allow corporatism to exist where you have corporations that are using money to influence government. They're kind of in bed with one another. It's nope. We're going to make sure corporations stay in their lane. We're going to make sure the government stays in our lane. And I think that's the best way forward.
It really is. It's just a BHAG. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal. Because when you look, I mean, the conversation that Donald Trump had with Joe Rogan was taken off Google right around the time that it was said to have around 36 million views.
Right.
The interesting thing associated with that is if you dig a little bit deeper, Google was the #1 investor or contributor towards the Kamala Harris campaign. That's interesting to me, right? Like now all of a sudden you're looking at censorship. You're looking at like picking sides, playing a team, not sharing all the information, which to me is a form of lying.
Absolutely.
You're not telling the whole story. You're mitigating this. And then because it was already out and there's other, forums and platforms to share this information, you're almost shooting yourself in the foot. It's so obvious.
Ironically, it drives more eyeballs to it.
100%.
Why are you taking this down? Why are you trying to keep me from seeing it?
Totally. It's like telling a kid not to do something. They kind of want to do it more.
That's right. That's right.
Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because it wasn't just Google. If you go down the list and you see big tech companies, they're typically left-leaning. And then you see someone like Zuckerberg come back later, like, actually, I'm evolving a little bit. I've gotten into some Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu and some UFC stuff. I'm seeing the health initiative here. But it also raises another question, which is, at what point was health picking a side politically?
Right.
Right? Like, at what point is taking care of yourself, treating your neighbor with kindness, moving and engaging in optimal, great choices associated with your nutrition, your mindset, and your well-being? Why is that considered political?
It's absolutely mind-boggling. And it's so odd to me. So, getting back to Facebook, for example, Mark Zuckerberg gave a commencement address, I believe it was around 2011 or so, and he talked about the importance of free speech and how Facebook would always be a place for free speech. And of course, you fast forward 10 years later and you find out that many within the now Meta organization were actually suppressing a lot of speech that wasn't just opinions, but were like objective facts that were inconvenient for our friends on the left side of the aisle.
Not to mention that's also, at that time, a huge source of news for people.
Absolutely.
As is Instagram now.
Right.
But now you look at this stuff and you're like, what do I believe? I can't look at Google. I can't look at this. Do I go to DuckDuck? At what point is that going to be censored? Do I go to X? Like, what do I trust? All this misinformation coming in, and the American people are left like with this clusterfuck in their mind.
It's a total cluster. And this is where I'm such a big believer in, you have to understand your lane and stay in it. And then everyone else benefits from it, right? Like if Facebook were to say, hey, look, we are a social platform where people are we are enabling people to gather on the social platform and share ideas or promote their business or just share what they're eating for dinner, whatever, post pictures of their family. That's our job. Our job is to create this space. Our job is not to tell people what they can and can't discuss and censor ideas that we personally, like people running Facebook, may or may not agree or disagree with. Mm-hmm. Our lane is this, and we're going to execute to the best of our abilities. And, same thing with Instagram, same thing with any corporation, really. I mean, like when you think about over the past few years, how many corporations went woke over the past few years, and they were, trying to push an agenda through their brand. And this might be a soft drink brand. Hey, no, just go out and make great soft drinks, right? That's something that unites all of us, right? Soft drinks. And if you drink soft drinks, right? I don't want your political agenda. I want your soft drinks or sports. You see the viewership down in the NBA right now. Mm-hmm. Well, I used to be a huge NBA fan. I used to love watching the NBA. I used to love the competitiveness. I'm watching because I like basketball and I like seeing two teams compete for the championship. I don't want your agenda, your political agenda shoved down my throat. I want you to play basketball. If I want politics, I'm going to go to a political arena. Mm-hmm. And this is where I think, and I'm hoping it's a bit of a reset with the recent Trump election, where you're going to have organizations that recognize, hey, wait a second, what lane are we supposed to be in? Okay, let's just stay in this lane and figure it out from there. We don't need to inject politics into every single corporation and discussion and nonprofit that exists. We can just stay in our lane and move forward.
That's so well said.
The Trident family taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good, bad, and everything in between. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. I start my day with the Sweet Cream Cold Brew as I am prepping my mind and body for fitness, service, coaching, and podcasting. With various locations in San Diego, they offer over 14 nitro cold brews and a variety of specialty drinks. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from the Keto Bakery. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code ALLSMITH to take your coffee experience to the next level.
Man, you're smart.
Depends who you ask.
The thing I like about that, though, is just it simplifies it, right? Like, people are going to come to me more for fitness advice because I just spend time in that arena. It doesn't make me an expert, doesn't make me a rocket scientist. It just means within that space, I happen to put more time and energy that can then diffuse into people that are curious within that space.
Right.
But what's interesting to me is the whole concept of like silence is violence that kind of came around the Black Lives Matter movement. And I remember at that time, ironically, you're wearing a Vuori vest. We were doing some online Vuori workouts. And just like behind the scenes in the DMs, people were frustrated that I just didn't want to get involved in posting a black square. I didn't know enough about it.
Right.
And I wanted to focus on fitness and mindset. I wanted to stay in my lane. But then people are like, oh, you white chauvinist male or this, that, and the other behind the scenes. And I'm like, guys, like, I don't want to publicly comment on that. I'm seeking to understand. I'm gathering more information. But then you also get the pressure of like, oh, you have this forum. You should have a voice. You should be, somebody that's trying to integrate change. And if someone low level like me is getting that, I can only imagine the LeBrons, like some of these guys in the NBA that are getting pressure from all different camps. And then they've got teams, and those teams are feeling the pressure. And like, oh, we're trying to grow a brand. Maybe we should align with this because that's going to allow growth after your career. There's so much input.
Right.
And it's hard to know what's right, what's wrong. And then if you even take it a step further, there's pictures of like LeBron dabbing up Diddy. There's pictures of some of these guys spending time in the Epstein camp. And then it perks your eyebrows even more of like, whoa, how much of sport and culture and the human experience is infiltrated with politics, and how much is politics infiltrated there? Because they know people are going to be watching social media. People are going to be watching these games. If we put words, if we put them in shirts, if we have them saying certain things, now that's going to be better received because people trust these people.
Right.
And it creates psychological manipulation that's very difficult to know how to filter. And so I'm curious your thoughts. Like, I'm not saying right or wrong. I am saying, though, that I'm very curious.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you think back to, I'm sure you had friends, influencers on social media that during the COVID pandemic were at least offered, if not paid, by the government to, hey, will you promote the vaccine? Will you show people? Will you bring the phone in and film yourself, getting the vaccine? Because we're trying to push that out there. And it's like, well, I don't follow my fitness influencers for their thoughts on the COVID vaccine. Like, I follow my fitness influencers to have better mobility, have more strength, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Similarly, like, I don't follow LeBron James because I want his position on China. Like, I follow him because I want to watch him play great basketball. And if we can just get back to, as a society, like, trying to stay in a particular lane and recognizing we're not all subject matter experts in different fields. Like, no one should follow me for wanting to play basketball because I'm not a great basketball player, but I do have something to say about public policy or maybe climbing mountains because I have a little more experience there. That's kind of my lane. And so I think we can all just kind of simplify things again instead of having to make everything so politicized about stuff we're not subject matter experts in, and we'll all be better off.
It's very well said, man. You mentioned climbing mountains.
Yeah.
On our last conversation, you summited Everest, and we talked briefly online. You were navigating some injuries, and now you've gotten the MRI. You've gathered a little bit of data, and you saw you had a little bit of a patellar quad issue going on. How have you been navigating the injuries, and what treatments have you sought?
Yeah, so I turned out I tore my patellar tendon about 16 months ago, And I didn't know I had torn it at the time, so I just went through some pretty typical PT protocols, took some time off, and unfortunately was not getting any better. Then went to Everest and kind of thrashed it at Everest, right? It's obviously a very physically intensive endeavor. When I got back, I said, all right, I need to get an MRI. I need to get to the bottom of this. Got an MRI, saw that there's a tear in the patellar tendon. Two options, a PRP injection or surgery. And ultimately I decided, hey, I can always get surgery in the future. Let's go ahead and start with the PRP injection. So I had the injection about 4 weeks ago. And up until about 4 weeks ago, I had pain with every step. I couldn't load my knee without a lot of pain. And if I were to even try running within half a mile, my knee would be barking at me and then be swollen for the next couple of days. Fast forward 4 weeks since that injection. I have to say, the injection is painful. Man, that is not an easy injection.
Yeah, I agree. Big needle too.
Big needle. Yeah. I'm embarrassed to say. So they laid me on a table, right? And they have your knee kind of hanging off the table. And I'm like, all right, here we go. And if you can imagine sticking a needle inside your patellar tendon, like there's no meat there. It's just like,
yeah.
So
I'm like grimacing thinking about it.
So they stick it in, and I think of myself as a tough guy, right? Like I have a high pain tolerance. I'm just sitting on the table and they stick it in, and I'm like, okay, that's not too bad. And then you can feel the plasma going inside. And you're like, whoa. I curled up, and a nurse had to come over and actually like physically hold me down because it was so excruciating.
Yeah.
Hobble out of there, little humiliated, just like for how much pain I was in and how much of a baby I had been during that process. Next couple of days, knee starts to feel a little bit better, and now here we are 4 weeks later, and I can walk pain free. I'm starting to load it, going through different exercises. I actually just went skiing in Mammoth this past weekend.
Oh, congrats, man!
Yeah,
that's huge.
Pain free.
Because that's a lot of like knee flexion. That's a lot of dorsiflexion at the ankle.
Yeah.
At the ankle. So there's a lot of loading of the quad there. That's huge.
So much. And so to be able to then I didn't go as hard as I normally do because I'm still trying to ease back into it. But to have 3 days of skiing and not have any significant pain, I'm like, wow, okay, this thing is working. So I'm going to give it a few more weeks before I get back out there running. So yeah, PRP injection.
Dude, I love that, man.
Because you've done it as well.
Done 3 or 4 of them on my left elbow, and I totally echo that. Man, I mean, every time I get tattoos or every time I get a PRP injection, I'm definitely grimacing. In this particular instance, I had a hoodie on, and I pulled it around. I was like biting it. And fortunately, I did mine with Dr. Jason Fan over at Live Natural.
Okay.
And his bedside manner was so good. Like the way he palpated and kind of verbally talked to me through it was very helpful.
Yeah.
And I integrated mine, as I told you before, with ozone, which creates a little bit more of an inflammatory response, but also creates a little bit of gapping at the joint structure to give the plasma-rich therapy a little bit more space to get in there, just because it's a very small joint. And I don't know, man, I'm a big believer, like you said, surgery is always on the table at some point.
Right.
And maybe there's a case to be said that, like, surgery more at the onset of the injury will lead to a faster recovery. Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
But I didn't really want to take that risk. I didn't really want to be away from exercise, away from drinking coffee, walking my dog in a sling, all the things for that long. And so I've become a huge believer in PRP, man. Stem cell, I briefly mentioned to you. I just had a friend, Brandon Lillard, get stem cell for his back. And he was in a base jumping accident, and it's seemingly helping him tremendously. We had Shane Dory and the big wave surfer on, I think 3 or 4 days after he did almost like a full body stem cell and lots of different joint structures down in CPI in Mexico. And I just texted with him the other day. He's like, dude, I'm pain free.
Wow. And
so I don't know, man, there's something to be said about a lot of these naturopathic medicines that aren't necessarily covered by health insurance.
Right.
But I think there's going to be a case for them. We talked a little bit about like RFK Jr. talking about optimizing some of these, just the awareness.
Right.
Maybe we tinker with health savings accounts. I know the FDA put a crack on peptides for a little while, things like BPC 157, CJC 1295, tesamorelin, but those are things that stimulate your pituitary gland to then produce more natural human growth hormone, as opposed to needing to take synthetic growth hormone or synthetic testosterone replacement therapy, which comes at a higher risk.
Right.
And so I'm really optimistic that at the very least, some of these protocols will be presented to people, as opposed to, I only learned about this in medical school. Let's send you to this specialist, and then that specialist is going to recommend surgery. it's just a limited perspective to me. And all this is doing is it's opening and broadening the landscape of the healthcare initiative.
If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And so, yeah, if you're an orthopedic surgeon, you're mostly going to be naturally inclined to recommend surgery, right? Because that's what you know and that's what your experience is all about, as opposed to thinking about it as, no, surgery is a tool, and it's a tool that can be used in certain situations. We might not need a hammer for this. We might need something else that's maybe less invasive and allows, I mean, the body's amazing, right? Like, so anything you can do naturally and let your body heal naturally on its own, you're probably going to be better off in the long run, unless there is something kind of catastrophic, right? Like if you split your femur in two, yeah, you're probably going to have surgery for that, right? I don't think a PRP injection is going to be able to put your femur together after a compound fracture. But, aside from that, hey, if we could all just, drop some weight, eat better, move more, get more sunlight, get better sleep, most of our problems kind of take care of themselves.
Totally. And I saw it yesterday. Peter Attia had a phenomenal little bit that was circulating social media. It's like, guys, we're majoring in the minors. We're trying to go after the sauna, the cold plunge, all the injections, the NAD therapy, all the things that they do have value. But if you're not doing the basics, like you just mentioned over here, it's like stepping over $100 bills to pick up pennies.
Right.
And, it might get you by for a short term, but in the long term, like we need integration of those habits. And that's what I really love about your leadership strategy is you're not just saying it, but you live it.
Yeah.
You put yourself out there, and when you're navigating an injury, you find other ways to move. You find other ways to heal. And RFK Jr. has been a little disruptive so far. I mean, Trump's not even in office yet, but they are allowing some of these educational conversations to float to the surface. I'm sure he's on a few different forms of some sort of peptide therapy or testosterone replacement therapy. The guy's jacked.
He's massive.
He's a monster, but he's walking the walk.
Right.
And so, the integration of those things, doctor prescribed, based on a blood panel, I'm all for it when you're getting a little bit older.
I mean, it's tough to look at him, and I believe he's in his 70s now.
Yeah.
And say that he's less healthy than the average 7-year-old. I don't think so.
It's hard to believe that.
Yeah. I mean, he would take me in a wrestling match right now, right?
Totally. And it's like we look at our previous director of health and wellness and whatnot in the United States, and it's like, okay, this doesn't make sense.
Right.
And then you move forward, and like I've had Dr. Sean Baker on, formerly and kind of sort of practices orthopedic medicine, but he's the carnivore guy all over Instagram, all about eating steaks. And, he's in his 50s and the guy's jacked.
Right.
He's taking care of himself consistently. The other thing that's beautiful about the carnivore diet is, I don't think it's perfect for everybody.
Right.
We got to be careful with cholesterol, and we got to make sure we're looking at blood panels, but it is limited ingredient, right? You're not getting all of these processed ingredients that you can't pronounce, that have an unlimited shelf life.
Right.
That are things that I'm like, this is artificial, full of dyes, full of things that could potentially be cancer causing. I really don't know. And then I pause for a moment. I'm like, okay, you're saying all these issues with cholesterol and blood pressure associated with this diet over here. But then I go over here and I look at Bill Gates. I look at Beyond Burger. I look at what happened for a little while there. Same thing with the money. All of a sudden, right around 2020 to 2022, Beyond Burger stock starts to go up. They're selling a ton of these things because the marketing advertising is fear-based. And then all of a sudden you see what's actually coming forward with all of the ingredients, which most of us don't even know what they are. And then all of a sudden the stock starts to tank. And then you pause and you dig deeper and you're like, oh, he's one of the largest owning farm owners of farmland in the country. That's unbelievable. So now we're seeing, oh, he donated $50 million to the Harris campaign. These are just factual things when you're just following the money. I, once again, can zoom out and say, hey, I am no expert, but I'm looking at patterns. I'm looking at ingredient profile, and I'm thinking that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And when you look at a lot of the things that are cancer causing or causing problems in our country, it's usually when us humans get too involved and overly complicate the process.
And when you consider that you have the government who is creating policies to limit real production of meat, right? Limit farms that where cows are butchered and then the meat gets produced and then sent out at the benefit of these artificial meats. It kind of makes you wonder, well, why is that? And if you're the institution that's pushing that, but you've lost credibility in these other aspects of society, why should I trust you on this one? Like that's a perfect example of where politics and money, money influencing politics, influencing government policies to benefit a certain agenda, benefit a certain corporation at the potential expense of the rest of society who should all be eating better and should be eating more natural products. than these artificial products. It makes you wonder, like, well, whose interests are you really looking out for here?
No, very well said. The Trump assassination attempts, man.
Yeah.
Those were heavy. I don't know if we've seen anything like that in the history of our country. And it seemingly was kind of just brushed over and swept under the rug.
Feels like it never happened.
And, you know, you pause for a second, you're like, okay, this guy was on a rooftop that the coordinator, the director of the CIA said, oh, we weren't up there because there was a slope on the roof. I call BS. May or may not have been wearing a scope. When I listen to JD Vance talk, you know, he's an avid shooter, pretty good shot after being in the Marine Corps for a little while. It's really tough to miss that. The fact that Trump turned his head last minute and it just nicked his ear is some sort of higher power playing a role. What are your thoughts there? Because it wasn't just that attempt. There was other attempts, and they were seemingly not made to be a big deal.
Right.
And I'm curious, you know, being a more of a health and fitness guy, just observing what's going on within the political regime, something about all of this stuff just wasn't computing and wasn't adding up. And it goes back to that distrust and lack of buy-in that you mentioned earlier.
I used to be a conspiracy theorist back before I got on the city council and then became mayor in Coronado. And the reason I'm no longer a conspiracy theorist is because, from my experience, government is simply too incompetent to pull something off, to pull off a widespread conspiracy. Now, that being said, it would not surprise me at all if you have people that are, say, cut more from an activist cloth, that are in positions of power, that want to advance their own agenda, using those institutions, using those organizations to advance their agenda in a way that might not be within their lane that they're supposed to be in a way that might not benefit society at large. And so, like, as it relates to the Trump, the attempted assassination on former President Trump, you had complete incompetence. You either had one of two things. You either had complete incompetence within the Secret Service to not notice this guy sitting on the rooftop, just a short distance away from the president, former president, and leading candidate to be the next president. So either complete incompetence, or there was an attempt to create the situation where Trump could be assassinated. Like, it has to be one of those two things. It's either just sheer incompetence, in which case head should roll, metaphorically, or, like, people need to be fired. Like, either way, like, you need a clean house there.
And the other side of the coin of that is just the response.
Yeah.
Well, what are your thoughts on that? You know, that slope theory seemingly was like, that's not an appropriate response, especially when you're listening to higher up military personnel that are like giving their specific depictions on shooting analogy, shooting strategy. I didn't buy that.
Talking to some of my friends in Coronado that are, you know, on the SEAL teams or, you know, part of special warfare, and I'm like, what do you hear? What are your thoughts on this roof? Because this roof had the slope, that we couldn't station guys up there. I mean, they all just laughed. They found it preposterous. Because could you imagine, like, going into the battlefield and be like, well, we can't take that building because it has a sloped roof. And like, well, we're not even talking about like an A-framed house here. Like, it was the most gradual slope in the world.
Totally.
You know, like, I don't buy it. Right. I mean, just, well, not to like harp on COVID again, but just like when they said, oh, we're closing down the beaches. Well, I don't buy that me being out here on this large beach is going to jeopardize my health or anyone others, any other person's health. Like, I don't buy that roof is so sloped that a trained professional, a trained Secret Service agent, couldn't have been stationed on there. Because I, as just a regular person, could have easily sat on there or stood on there or laid on there or just watched over there. But you guys didn't. So I don't believe you anymore.
Yeah. It's very well said. Going back to COVID for a second, I've heard some things recently where, you know, you pause and you reflect and you're like, okay, what is a vaccine? If we were to define a vaccine, you know, you look at it as something that's trying to prevent disease or mitigate its ability to create destruction within your health, i.e. the flu vaccine and those things, which RFK also just came forward like, hey, I would never take a flu vaccine, which is just interesting, his perspective to take into consideration. But then what raised my eyebrows even more and made me more distrusting is like booster 1, booster 2, booster 3. I'm friends with a bunch of nurses that are working in the pediatric system, and they're seeing all this myocarditis. You're seeing some of these side effects. I don't recall, when you look at a risk-reward relationship where You take a vaccine that was rushed to market that's causing all of these downward spirals. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think it diffused a little bit into the current election that just took place, where it's just like so much of this stuff wasn't added up. And I think it goes back to like creating an initial plan, trying to create control, but then showing the government incompetence to execute.
Mm-hmm. When you look back at the Pfizer vaccine, for example, this is a publicly available document. Anyone can find it on the FDA's website. It was the document that was submitted to get the emergency health authorization for the Pfizer vaccine. And when they tested it, they had their control group, which did not receive the vaccine, and they had their group that did receive the vaccine. And what they found is that the group that received the vaccine had greater protection against severe consequences with COVID. But what they also found is that they also had more complications. The group that received the vaccine had more complications with other health issues than the group that did not. And the purpose of a vaccine, yes, it should be to protect you against whatever it's trying to protect you against, but you should also have, you shouldn't be sacrificing your risk level against all other ailments in a way that then produces a different, a less beneficial mortality rate. And that's, I think, was lost in the whole discussion around the COVID vaccine, specifically as it relates to Pfizer. That, hey, you have this study that shows, yes, you're more protected against the virus, the COVID virus, but you're going to have other health consequences associated with it that might actually cancel out the benefits of the vaccine. It's like, okay, well, then is the vaccine really that beneficial? And also, you mentioned booster 1, booster 2, booster 3, et cetera. Initially, the CDC, Dr. Fauci all said, hey, if you get this vaccine, you won't be infected with COVID, which turned out not to be true. If you get this vaccine, you won't be able to transmit it to others. Turned out not to be true. Oh, you only need to get it once, and then it has perfect record of preventing transmission, perfect record of preventing infection. And then they said, oh, well, maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's not 100%. Maybe it's 90%. And then like a month later, you know what? Maybe it's not 90%. It's 80%, 70%, 60%, 50%. And there's like, oh, well, now you need a booster. You're like, well, if everything you told me before wasn't true, why should I trust you going forward on this?
Yes.
Once again, CDC has a very important role to play in our society. FDA should have a very important role to play in our society. But when you actively push an agenda that is unsupported by the science, and you're essentially lying to the American public, then you lose all credibility, especially if you're unwilling to admit, hey, you know what? We got this wrong. New set of information has been introduced, so we're changing our opinion in a humble way. But they didn't do that.
Yeah. That actually makes me like really trust people more when they honor a screw up. Right. And they're like, hey, I didn't have access to this information before. We've since learned X, Y, and Z scientific data. So here's the new protocol. And that feels more honest and forthcoming. And at the end of the day, we are humans.
Right.
We're not experts or the titles that we say. We're operating to the best of our ability based on the information at large. But then if you take it a step further, going back to the conversation around peptides, all of a sudden the FDA cracks down on the ones that I mentioned before, BPC 157, which is talked about prevalently on Rogan with regards to UFC fighters and helping with the tissue damage and gut health of a lot of people in the world. That's cracked down on, harder to get access to. Then you're seeing the challenges with Tessa Morrell and you're seeing the challenges with CJC. But all of a sudden they're allowing Ozempic. They're allowing semaglutide, which are now weight loss things. Is it? But simultaneously in relation to COVID, the side effects, especially with gut health and the risk associated with Ozempic is very high. Can it be a tool for the obese population to mitigate appetite and lose weight? Absolutely. All of these things are tools. But when you make that, the access to that so easy, and then make these other things that are very helpful not easy, is it sick care? Is it health care? Is it health profit? You know that everybody wants to lose weight. That's a huge reason why we operate within the fitness industry. We see the health biomarkers associated with having a lower BMI, seeing all the things that come with having an optimal weight and not carrying too much body fat, especially in and around the organs. So is that now the selling point based on fear and you're just trying to make it more profitable and then put the fine print, not really like disclosing the risks associated with that, that doesn't make sense to me. If you're going to play with this one, fine, but also play with these over here.
Right. Like be an honest broker.
Yeah.
Right.
Like be totally transparent around it for sure.
Right.
You've had tremendous success managing the homeless population. It's something that's really raised a lot of notoriety for you and your time in office there in Coronado. How do we make that happen in all of San Diego? How do we make that happen in Los Angeles? How do we make that happen in San Francisco?
It honestly just takes political will and a change of policies. So, look, there are many contributing factors to Coronado's low, if not non-existent, homeless population. But one of the biggest contributing factors is our approach. And for years now, we've had this approach that recognizes we have a dual responsibility. We have a moral and civic responsibility to connect those homeless individuals that legitimately want help with resources to get back on their feet. And so we do that, where anytime a homeless individual comes to Coronado, we make contact with them immediately. We're very proactive about that. And we let them know, hey, we have resources available for you that we contract with a third-party provider, Father Joe's. We can connect you with Father Joe's. You can have a roof over your head tonight. You can get good food. You can have a nice bed to sleep in, and you can start rebuilding your life. But you can't stay here. And the reason you can't stay here is because not only is that unfair to you and does that set you up for failure, but it's also unfair to our broader community and our city's responsibility to maintain clean and safe public spaces for everyone. And so if we as a city, whether you're Coronado, Los Angeles, San Francisco, or even San Diego, approach the problem with recognizing those two dual responsibilities, then the homeless situation starts to take care of itself. A lot of people are unaware of this, but the homeless population in 2014 was about 610,000, give or take, nationwide, 610,000. 10 years later, you know what it is today? It's about 625,000. So about the same. It hasn't increased drastically throughout the entire nation. But where has it increased? It's increased in California and New York and Washington and Oregon. Those 4 states make up the vast majority of any increase in the homeless population nationwide, because in most states, the homeless population has actually decreased. What do all 4 of those states have in common? They have very similar policies that for a long time just let people set up their tent encampments wherever they wanted. They let them engage in the public use of very hard drugs. They had very lax shoplifting policies. And the reason that's a factor here is because a lot of people, when they're suffering from addiction and they're looking to get a fix, they're unable to maintain their job. When you're unable to maintain your job, you end up on the street. When you end up on the street and you need some form of funds to maintain your addiction, you start shoplifting. And so you create this ecosystem where homelessness isn't just allowed to happen, but you're actually enabling it. You're enabling people to live this destructive lifestyle through these really terrible policies. So if you get back to, hey, we're going to have the political will to implement certain policies that recognize the dual responsibility we have as a city to connect those that need help with help, and also to maintain clean and safe public spaces, the homeless problem will go away largely on its own.
Free is the way to be. Life beats us up a bit and causes some bumps and bruises, but that doesn't mean we have to stay on the sidelines. This is why we've partnered with Kinneon Labs. Get back to doing what you love with this incredible portable device designed to get you back in the game. Kinneon is on a mission to move people from pain to possible with their top-rated red light therapy and laser solution, which tackles inflammation along with muscle and joint pain quickly and effectively. What I love is that it's portable and rechargeable, making it easy to actually incorporate into my everyday life consistently. It's small and lightweight, so you can throw it in your gym bag or work bag, or even an overnighter. Kinneon's lasers and LED combo make this cutting-edge device extremely versatile for use with general aches and pains, as well as chronic back pain, arthritis, post-surgery recovery, endometriosis, and more. This has been an amazing tool keeping my elbows and knees pain-free for pressing, pulling, and squatting in the gym. Great tools like the Move Plus give me the freedom and flexibility to continue living life on my terms,
without limitations. There are a lot of reasons why over 15,000 people are using this device and rating it 4.7 stars and above. Head on over to Kinneon.io and use code ALLSMITH at checkout to begin your pain-free journey. Absolutely. That's a great picture that you painted for us a little bit. And it does make sense. There's a lot of left-wing policies in all of those places that you just mentioned. And my curiosity there is, when you look at the election results, all of those locations seemingly lost to Kamala, but the gap wasn't as big this go around. You definitely saw a little bit more red voters within those demographics. Why do you think that was? Do you think it was because of the distrust that we're discussing here today? Do you think it was because of the shift from Biden to Kamala Harris and, you know, some of the challenges in leadership associated with that, and feeling as if the Democratic Party was not suitable to then lead our country? What do you think is the thought process there?
My thought on that is there is a really big disconnect right now between Democratic voters support for office in terms of their candidates and what policies they're actually supporting. And the most perfect example of this is Democrats in California, although it was closer than, say, 4 years ago, still overwhelmingly voted for Kamala Harris. But Democrats in California overwhelmingly voted for Proposition 36. Proposition 36 was a proposition that recriminalized shoplifting. It recriminalized public drug use. And so here voters are supporting Kamala Harris, who is opposed to Prop 36, but they are then themselves voting for Prop 36. And my guess is that both Democrat voters and Republican voters are more aligned on policy positions than they are on their preferred candidates for office, which is why I'm a huge believer, once again, in that policy over politics. And it's kind of funny. So in the state of California, Democrats wildly outnumber Republicans. But when you look at the statewide voter recommendations for ballot measures, and you look at what the Democratic State Party put out, and you look at what the California Republican State Party put out, voters in California sided with Republicans like 8 out of 10 times, and only sided with the Democrats like 4 out of 10 times. You're like, wait a second. Does that mean California is a much more moderate and conservative state than you would expect just based on purely on party registration? I think the answer to that question is yes. Now, voters are not enamored with the Republican Party, right? The Republican Party in the state of California is a very damaged brand. Like I don't think the Democratic voters in California will ever say, yeah, I really like Trump. They might not like his personality or whatnot. But when it comes to just a discussion about individual policies, they're far more conservative than might appear from the outside. You make a really good point there. The likability of Trump in relation to the Democratic Party. A lot of people don't like how he speaks on women, how he carries himself, and it seems a little bit arrogant sometimes. However, the policies aren't always in alignment with his persona and his bravado. Right. And I think sometimes that gets misconstrued. It almost creates a psychology of like, oh, I don't like him, but I'm not going to spend the time to get to know him because I don't like him. So I'm going to create this story in my head, and I'm going to vote accordingly. And it does go to show. I mean, same thing kind of falls in alignment with Elon, right? Like he's coming out now with being a little bit more public, being a little bit like, I don't care, right? There's that famous clip that went everywhere that he was just like, I'm going to do what I think is right. And I'm going to keep pushing the boundaries on scientific exploration and trying to get to Mars and all some of these other things. But he used to be a Democrat. Yep. That was crazy. So was Rogan. Yeah. Right. And so like, I think so was RFK. Totally. Yeah. Totally. Things definitely to take into consideration. Like I value the people that are like, hey, I tried to play on that side, but the policy didn't align anymore with the majority of things, right? I find it hard to believe that any person on either side of the political spectrum agrees with every single thing if you were to make a list. Right. And so my question now is just the curiosity around this Doge, right? Like what do you think is going to take place with Elon kind of in charge of that role? What are your thoughts in relation to some of these tax proposals and what's going to happen with the IRS? It's long overdue. It's long overdue. So when you look at, and this is true at the national level for the federal government, but it's also true at the state level and local governments. So I'm going to use city of San Diego as an example. In the past 10 years, the population of the city of San Diego has increased by roughly 5%. But the number of employees at the city of San Diego has increased by 20%. Well, are our roads better paved now? Are our sidewalks better? Are our parks more clean? Are the streetlights getting changed out like when they should be? Are we really better off as a society with 20% more employees from the city of San Diego than we were 10 years ago? I would say probably not. But we have a much larger structural deficit now because of all these employees and because of all these extra programs that have been created in the past 10 years. Similarly with the federal government, right? The number of federal bureaucrats has absolutely exploded. But are we better off as a nation with all these additional bureaucrats that are doing stuff that are outside the main lane of what the federal government is supposed to be about? And I would answer unequivocally, no, we're not better off with that. And to me, DOGE is the real first opportunity in a long time where it seems like there is a political will to ask the question, does the federal government really need all these bureaucrats that are working from home that haven't moved their mouse in, several years? Do we really need all these federal buildings that are now largely unoccupied because all these government workers are working from home? Do we really need all these programs? And I think the answer is going to be unequivocally, no, we don't. And we should be shaving hundreds of billions of dollars from the federal government budget.
Totally. I spoke to a small business owner local to Coronado that shot me a text this morning, and he wanted me to discuss with you about locally, San Diego has a $258 million deficit, but other cities seemingly have a surplus. And that's very interesting to me, especially seeing now that like a lot of the people from Silicon Valley are starting to come down here. We're seeing a lot more housing being built, but typically it needs to be east of the 5, like I've heard you discuss before, right. But the majority of it is west of the 5, which it makes sense for the monetization for builders, but it's tough to afford some of this housing. I mean, a 1-bedroom apartment is almost $3,000 now. Right. Like, how do you afford that unless you're working your job, maybe working a second job, and then driving Uber or doing Uber Eats or something on the weekend? It's very challenging to make it in a city like this now if you are navigating within that middle class.
Oh yeah, and a lot of it, I hate to beat this this dead horse, but it all comes back to the policies. So if you rewind the clock back to like the early 2000s and you were to look at maps that projected where the future housing stock would be built in San Diego County, what you would find is that map would show a projection of housing being built out in East County. Mm-hmm. A lot of middle class housing, single family development being built out there. But then as you fast forward from the early 2000s to like the 2010s, all of a sudden that map changed where government got rid of all of this land that was going to be developed for middle class housing. And instead they said, no, you can now only develop west of the 5 or in already really densely populated areas. And they did this, the thought was for environmental reasons. Oh, well, if we can just pack people into these areas that are already developed, they won't have to drive as far to work. And so then that'll have a reduction of the impact on the environment if they're driving all these gas guzzling cars. Okay, fine. Let's just accept that that's a valid argument. Well, the downside of that is, well, land is much more expensive along the coast. And so if it's much more expensive to acquire the land, acquire the property, and then you have to go through all of these permitting considerations for construction, and it's much more difficult to develop along the coast than it is to develop inland, well, then the housing is naturally going to be more expensive. So, okay, maybe you've had a slight reduction in the impact to environment, but you've now just skyrocketed housing prices. So you have to look at things in terms of trade-offs. And then when you have people like Elon Musk come around and develop this revolutionary car company in Tesla, where now, well, cars don't have to be gas guzzling, right? You can have a great electric vehicle. So why can't I go build my middle-class housing out in East County? There's no impact to the environment. There's less impact to the environment, even if I'm driving more because I'm driving an electric vehicle. So to me, it always just comes back down to the policies, where these policies have artificially increased the price of housing. They've increased the price of food. They've increased the cost of living for everyone in a way that hasn't actually benefited our quality of life.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very well said, and it's very interesting just to see what's going on with the housing market. I mean, I previously worked in East Village for about a decade, and there's a lot of housing going up. There's a lot of apartments. there's no parking anymore.
There's no parking.
If you're somebody that's traveling a rough distance from your work to one of the local businesses down there, I don't really see how those local businesses are going to survive.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's that, and then there's parking enforcement. Most spots are not over 2 hours. So then now you're getting tickets. Like it is an ecosystem designed to be like, hey, you either live here or you don't, or you got to Uber everywhere.
Right.
And it's not set up for success to allow people in transit to come in and out of there unless you're wanting to pay $40 to go to the gas lamp district for a fun night.
Right. And the gas lamp district, a few years before COVID, that was the place to be.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a fun spot out. It was always jamming, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Totally.
And now when you go down there, it's pretty dead.
Yeah.
No matter what day you go down there.
Yeah, it's a pain in the butt. Little Italy is where it's at now.
Little Italy is where it's at. Yeah, it's a great spot.
Right. Great people, great food, places to park. A little bit more of like a loungy ambiance, which I appreciate because then you can engage in conversation.
Right.
And I really do think like post-pandemic, like people are craving connection. They are craving seeking to understand like, hey, what's your story? Like, where do you come from? How did you get into that? Like, where are you going next? And I think that's a really important part of tribal nature. And I think we're slowly but surely starting to get back to that.
I think so too. And you mentioned CrossFit earlier, and I think that's CrossFit did a great job in creating that sense of community, right? Where you weren't just going there for the workout. You're going to see your buddy Bryce, right? You're going to see make new friends. And then all of a sudden it's not just about the workout. It's about community. It's about connection.
Yep.
And when that went away during the pandemic, it's only come back even stronger now. People are demanding it more now.
I mean, you look at the fitness space, man, like especially in San Diego. First of all, everybody's good looking. Everybody's taking their clothes off because we're close to the beach. But like you've got all these other businesses now. You've got FitStop.
Yeah.
You've got The Yard. You've got brands like LSKD.
Right.
You've got Trident Coffee. You've got the Mad Beat. I mean, PB's like the mecca for putting on like a master class in community.
Right.
These people are doing run clubs. They're doing all these different things. And what's so cool about it is it's less about the workout, and it's almost like creating this dating situation where you're going to the same place all the time. You're taking care of yourself because you want to look good, feel good, play good at whatever the event is. But guys and girls are meeting each other now, and there's conversation around a commonality. And it's not all about like, hey, let's go grab a drink or let's go to dinner.
Right.
Now it's, hey, let's go do this fun activity. And then we can do it in a community sense that feels safe.
Right.
And then if we want to branch off into our little segments, we can. I think it's genius.
Oh, I think it is too. And it's, so I'm not a drinker. I've never drank my whole life. But like, in the past, it seemed that as though drinking was the excuse to get together with friends.
Yep.
And now it's, well, no, let's go to the volleyball club. Let's go to the run club. Let's go to whatever. That's our excuse to get together with friends. And then, afterwards we can grab a bite or whatnot. But like, it's really cool to see community developing around healthy activities.
Totally. Especially things like sauna and ice. We got to get you over to the compound to do a little sauna and ice. Talking about environmental factors, man. RFK is doing a great job talking about the pesticides that are going on our vegetables, some of the different things associated with microplastics, trying our best to integrate a little bit more clean water and remove some of the fluoride and things that, previously were said to be beneficial to our health, but now we're realizing, are potentially cancer causing. There's a lot of things going on within our environment that, I don't know, as a human, I don't want to feel like I'm tiptoeing around all the time, but I am aware of it.
Yeah.
We've got the sexy Berkey water filter, and we're trying our best to purchase organic, grass-fed, grass-finished. It's pricey. We're looking into regenerative agriculture from companies like Perennial Pastures. How do you kind of start that conversation? I think RFK is doing a good job starting it. But if it's more expensive to produce, it is difficult to hire people to manage. I mean, regenerative agriculture is a great idea, but they're sold out all the time because you can't mass produce that much. Also, the cost of the food is a little bit higher. And so I'm just curious, like, how do we mass produce but still create quality products that we're going to consume from a nutritional density standpoint without kind of taking jobs away and without, depleting kind of the ecosystem of our food industry and farmers?
Well, that is a question that is outside of my lane for sure, just because I don't have a lot of experience there. But from like an economic standpoint, it ultimately just comes down to trade-offs, right? Like if you're going to mass produce a lot of artificial foods, with all these preservatives, you can do so more cheaply, right? They can be more affordable, but you are going to suffer in other ways. And so that's the trade-off. And I'm just really excited that as of right now, it seems as though our society is trending towards the trade-off of, hey, you know what? My health is valuable to me, and it's valuable enough to me that I'm willing to pay more, even if it's 10, 20% more for food, for hydration that I trust, that I know is going to benefit me, because that's more important to me than, say, other things in my life that I can maybe say I can afford to cut back on these other things that aren't beneficial to my life because I value my health, my well-being so much more. So ultimately it's going to come down to trade-offs, and the market's going to respond to it. No,
it's very true. I love the recent picture that is kind of circulating social media around the picture of a farmer 20 years ago. Is overalls and like this jack dude with the biggest forearms from carrying all the equipment and whatnot. And now it's a picture of a guy that looks like he's in a spacesuit that's basically completely covered because of all the integration of chemicals and pesticides. And at the very least, that should create a little bit of awareness and kind of make you push back a little bit and zoom in with a little squint to the eye of like, something a little off there.
Right.
I don't know that I like that too much. And I think if you fast forward that, where I'd like to kind of conclude our conversation today is around our borders, man. And I lived in Sweden for a little while, and their government over there was like a form of socialism. But the population is significantly smaller. It's very cold. People are not in and out of there. The majority of the people there are locals.
Right.
Versus you look here, our borders are open. We're seeing the offering of free healthcare. Offering to pay for sex changes, which is a whole other can of worms or Pandora's box to explore. But what I love is there was just this whole circulating meme that kind of went around for a little bit of people that had Harris kind of flags all over their houses, and they just had people knock on their door and say, hey, you voted, to allow our borders to be open. Here are 3 people that have crossed. They're going to need to stay with you, and they're going to need a job, and this is what you voted for. And people are like, oh, I don't feel safe doing that. These are strangers. We've got a 2-year-old. We can't afford that within our budget. And it's like, but your voting and your policy went towards that. I'm curious your thoughts there. Obviously the meme is not always the most respectful way to converse, but it is something that perks my eyebrows a lot around like, that doesn't make sense. We have hardworking people that are already struggling with their health care, with their food, with gas prices. But yet we're using those tax dollars to give to strangers for things like sex changes.
Right.
I don't get it. Make it make sense.
Not only are we doing that, but we're borrowing to do that, right? We don't have a surplus. We're trillions of dollars in debt, tens of trillions of dollars in debt. We run $1 trillion+ deficit every year. And so we're borrowing money to do these other things, which makes it even worse, right? And so ultimately it always comes back down to our policies. And if you are a representative of the United States, you need to be representing the people that actually live here, that are citizens here, first and foremost. And yes, I would love to help every person from around the world, but our government can't do that. We can't even help ourselves. So first and foremost, you have to look out for the interests of the American public before you ever start trying to look elsewhere. And when you look at our border right now, we have made illegal immigration too easy, and we made legal immigration too difficult.
100%.
We should be attracting the best and brightest from around the world to come here, and we should be making that easy. Hey, do you have skills that would benefit our nation? Great. We'd love to have you. But we can't just open up our border to anyone and everyone that wants to come here for a lot of handouts. And the fact of the matter is, you saw this over in New York where they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars and just depleting their city's budget to house migrants that are here that are taking advantage of loopholes within our immigration laws at the expense of actual everyday New Yorkers. And I think that's causing a lot of people to wake up and they're saying, hey, wait a second, I have to go to this 9-to-5 job to put food on the table for my family, keep a roof over my head. But now you're giving my tax dollars to these other individuals that came into our country illegally. How is that fair to us? We're going to vote you out of office. And so I think that's, the good news around it is that people are starting to wake up and ask these questions, which shouldn't be tough to ask. We should be able to have conversations around this.
The problem is by allowing our borders to be open, it's incentivizing those in power because they want more votes.
Yeah.
Right. And they know that that's going to give them personal power to grow and monetize. And we look at a lot of the monetization associated with leadership, within the last few years. And, you know, you look at just the worth of people. If you just throw that into the Google machine or into ChatGPT, you can see that a lot of these leadership roles are monetizing big time.
If you're a member of Congress, depending on your level, so like the average member in the House makes a little bit less than, say, the House Majority Leader. You're around like $175,000+. But when you look at their wealth over time, it goes from, you know, oftentimes pretty modest when many members enter the House, to then worth tens of millions of dollars by the time they leave the House. And you're like, wait a second, you were only making about $175,000 a year. Not that that's not a big chunk of change for most people, but that's not enough to grow your wealth like into the tens of millions. How are you doing that? And it just gets back to a lack of trust and credibility of the institution. When you see people that are seemingly enriching themselves through their position and through these policies they're advancing.
Totally. What would you say, insider trading tips here and there associated with the stock market, just if we were to speculate?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because right now, members of Congress are allowed to trade stocks based on information they have, confidential briefings they have, that if the corporate officers of those companies were to trade their stock off of, it would be considered insider trading. And so you're like, wait a second, if the laws apply over here to the corporate officers, but they're not applying to Congress, well, then maybe we should fix that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen some controversy there for sure.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
Right? Like, be a man of your word. You've done that in office. And we saw Biden specifically say, nobody is above the law. And then he pardons his son. And now we're seeing a downstream effect of potentially other people that are in high-performing positions to potentially get pardoned. What are your thoughts on that? Like, is that hypocrisy? Is that justified? Everybody wanted, and their mom wanted to prosecute Trump.
Right.
Then you also look at some of the fluctuations with the election and some of the fraudulent things going on. Like, it did not make sense to me, Richard, that I didn't have to present an ID to go vote. I love voting in person. It's something I do with my parents. It's nostalgic. I like going there. I like pressing the buttons. I like shaking hands with the volunteers. It's an experience to me to like feel like my voice matters in our country, and to go there and feel like, oh, I don't need an ID. Somebody else could come in as Bryce Smith and vote.
Right.
That's not okay.
Right.
It also doesn't make sense.
Right. Your first part of the question about the pardons for Hunter Biden. I think most Americans look at that and they think to themselves, well, you're just using government to benefit yourself.
Yes.
Like you view yourself as above the law. And yeah, do you have the authority to do that as president of the United States? Sure. But have you just undermined that position? Have you like just absolutely thrown away your own credibility? Mm-hmm. That's what you've done. And yeah, obviously, like I'm sure any dad that has a son that's suffering from addiction, like can sympathize and empathize with the position President Biden found himself in. But you have to be bigger than that. Like, you just have to, especially given that you gave the American public your word that you weren't going to do that. Mm-hmm. And especially considering that everything you're accusing Trump of going to do, you've now just done against him. So it further undermines, and this is like my biggest fear, is that if you consider to continue to chip away at the credibility of all these institutions, well, then eventually nothing's left. And that's where you really start to see society start to fray. So yeah, that's concerning to me.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you, man. We jumped
Likewise.
into a lot of controversial topics, and I appreciate your patience and your willingness to play,
of course,
within some of these arenas. Area 51.
Sure.
I had to throw it at you.
Yeah.
There's different depictions. There's different stories. There's case studies. There's people saying that they've seen these things floating in the sky that are going at speeds faster than some of these, other planes, and their technology is so incredible.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Is there something that's not being shared with the American people that maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't? And that also jumps into the hint that we saw Donald Trump give on Rogan's episode around the Kennedy files, right? And like, are they connected? I don't know. Maybe.
So thinking about the drones over New Jersey right now,
yep,
and other spots in the country, You have the official statement from the government that is, we don't know what they are. We know they're not from a foreign adversary, and they're not from us, but we don't know what they are, and also there's nothing to fear. It's like, okay, well, if you don't know what they are, then how do you know there's nothing to fear? So those two statements cannot exist in the same universe. They just can't. So you're not being forthright with the American public.
Not to mention, there was information that came out that said nuclear technology, one of the things was missing from Ukraine, and they haven't been able to find it.
Right.
In alignment with all of this governmental spending in the form of billions of dollars that they somehow couldn't find.
Right. And it's like, I'm a really big believer in in extreme transparency, right? Especially if you're the government. And I can understand the thought that, well, hey, if there just hypothetically is a dirty bomb situation where nuclear material has been smuggled into the U.S. and our government is fearful that that might be going off somewhere, but they don't know exactly where, so they're using these drones to try to find it. I can understand the argument that, oh, we don't want people to unnecessarily panic. But by not disclosing this, if that is the case to the American public, well, you're causing panic in and of itself, right? Because now you're creating this fear, this uncertainty, and you're also eroding your trust, because when we come to find out a few months from now that you knew all along what those drones were, well, then we're not going to trust you the next time you tell us, oh, we don't know what's going on.
You withheld information.
Exactly. There's a way to deliver information to the American public that they will understand, they will process, and they will make the best decision for their own selves. And you have to ultimately trust the American public. You're there to represent them. They are adults. You work for them. They don't work for you. So in my opinion, the government should be much more, the government is not being transparent now. It's clear about that, because those two statements cannot exist in the same universe. We don't know what they are. They're also safe. So you need that. You need the transparency.
For sure, man. 4 hours left as the mayor of Coronado.
Yeah.
What comes to mind?
Just gratitude. Really just gratitude. It seems that everyone has a story about Coronado, right? Either you visited there as a tourist, you visited there during the 4th of July parade, you maybe were stationed there in the Navy, maybe you moved there with a young family so your kids could go to a great school district. But everyone seems to have a connection to Coronado, and so it's a special place. And to have represented Coronado for the past 8 years, it's been a tremendous honor, and I'm just so grateful that I had the opportunity to do that.
It's special, man. I get teary-eyed seeing you get a little teary-eyed thinking about it.
Yeah.
And we're a little over a week out from Christmas. The Hotel Del is always a special landscape. It's great. Beautiful during the day and during the night.
Yep.
The lights are incredible. There's festivities. There's people down there. There's ice skating. I appreciate your public service.
Thank you.
And I'm excited for what's to come next. And I hope you get to have a wonderful holiday season with your family.
I appreciate that. Likewise, Bryce.
Appreciate it. Guys, if you enjoyed my conversation with Richard Bailey, exploring all things of policy over politics, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Until next time.